Hi there, in this video I'm going to talk you through how I made the picture book version of Warhorse by Michael Morpurgo. This was a really fun job for me, definitely probably the hardest thing that I've ever done, but really rewarding as an experience, and it was quite a process. It took me probably a year and a half, coming on 2 years to make this book, but I'm very proud of how it turned out, so I'll talk you through how it was made. So firstly, just a little bit about my process. I always start basically in my sketchbook or on the computer, but just kind of sketching out really loose ideas. I quite like to be like as loose as possible here, just getting things down on paper, and I use just pencil and sometimes an ink pen, and then I take photos of these little thumbnails and I put them in the computer and draw over them. On a project like this, I definitely had time to start in the sketchbook, but some illustration jobs, they kind of got to start straight in the computer. I often scan things in, so here's some bits that I scanned for this job. Just kind of experimenting with texture, layering stuff up, kind of using ink and pencil and crayon, and then I make it all black and delete the white. And I keep everything in a handy folder called Tom's Textures, and I have a huge kind of backlog and catalogue of things that are scanned in over the years, so this is a really useful thing to start kind of building as an illustrator. I do a lot of painting digitally, so I have a load of brushes that I've downloaded from Adobe or bought from elsewhere, and and then I often adjust them and then rename them and resave them out, adjusting the flow or the opacity. And I do a lot of my painting digitally, so this whole book was done all in Photoshop. So I add colour, often on my Wacom Cintiq, which I do most of my work on. Sometimes do work on the iPad. I did quite a bit of Warhorse on the iPad. I have one at home that I use, but I don't get to use it quite as much because my wife's computer has broken, so she uses the iPad. But I mainly just do that when I'm kind of out and about. But Procreate is a great program, and you can kind of do almost everything you can do in Photoshop on it. So yeah, definitely, if you don't have Photoshop, don't let that hold you back. And working digitally just allows me to make changes really easily and kind of speeds things up. So illustrating Warhorse started with a pitch. This was one of the first images I did for the pitch, and this one actually ended up kind of being taken through to the cover eventually. But here it is in its kind of first incarnation, and I was kind of asked to pitch on this book against a couple of other illustrators. I think there was 4 or so. So I kind of did a load of different images in a range of different kind of feels and to a range of different finishes, just trying to kind of build a bit of a collection of how I envisioned drawing the characters. So that's another one of the images from the pitch. Just kind of putting my kind of drawing to the test, trying to draw horses and characters. It's definitely quite challenging for me. Horses seem to be the hardest thing to draw ever, but here was a couple more images from the pitch. Just trying to kind of create a bit of atmosphere and connection between the two main characters, and kind of really wanted to show how I would draw people, because it's something that doesn't feature loads in my work or in my kind of past portfolio before this book. So it was going to be a hugely important thing in this book. So I kind of put a bit of extra time into drawing characters and trying to get that right. So I won the job, got to meet Michael, which was lovely. And the first challenge was, how do you draw a horse? This is my early sketchbook drawing, just as a bit of a laugh of how to draw a horse. But I did a course by Aaron Blaise called How to Draw Horses, which was really great. this was some of the me following along with the course, just learning how it all worked, how the kind of horses muscles look, and what's going on under the skin. I still, after doing this course, wouldn't be able to draw a horse perfectly without kind of reference, but it definitely helped me kind of have a few pointers in my head and get a bit of an understanding of what was going on. There was a really great course. It's so in depth. You look at bone structure, muscle structure. I really recommend it, especially if you've got to draw a horse. Looking at how the legs work. In this project, it was such a it's not just drawing horses, it's drawing horses in kind of action poses of jumping and charging and running, and so that presented a whole load of challenges. And I kind of, in my visual style, want to kind of get things looking mostly as accurate as possible. So it was definitely a bit of a challenge trying to kind of figure all of this stuff out, but following along with the course was brilliant. And then some more of my studies, and then did some image research. We got loads from the National Army Museum resources. They gave us loads of pictures, and then the editors sent loads of great resources, photographs from the time, paintings. I really loved this film, They Shall Not Grow Old. That was a fantastic resource. It's kind of a recoloured footage from the First World War. 1917 just came out as I started this book. Towards the very end of this book, I remember seeing 1917, and it kind of really made me change a few things in the book, like especially the scale of the kind of potholes and the craters in no man's land. That was a real a sense that I got from 1917 as they kind of go into each crater and climb out. It didn't feel quite right in the previous illustrations that I'd done. Character design. So this was a huge thing, a huge kind of task to take on. Started with Joey and Albert. I was just doing as many sketches and pushing it to more cartoony, more serious, pushing different things, like making the eyes bigger or smaller, and the different shapes that you can use for the faces. Eventually kind of settling on a more realistic looking horse, and then same for Albert, just kind of trying out a load of different things. I wanted to get him as consistent as possible throughout the book, which is always definitely a massive challenge for me. It's one of the things I find hardest, but doing things like a turnaround of his face was really useful. It gave me something to refer back to as I went. And then doing sketches of the dad was good fun, Captain Nichols, and the mum. And then here you can see them all. I did a kind of colour version of them and put them all on one page. And this is something that I sent over to the publishers, and just was a really helpful guide for me just to refer back to as I did each page. Those poses never kind of were in the book, but I'd always look at what they were wearing and then try and match that on every spread. So rough drawings next. So just sketching out really loosely in my sketchbook with pencil or ink, just kind of ideas for pages. We kind of laid out the story in a PDF already, so I had that, but I was just kind of doing stuff as quickly as possible, just getting little ideas down. And then they turned into much neater roughs. So they would be taken into Photoshop and then drawn over and kind of neatened up, and I'd keep everything on layers so I can move things around and place the text on. And that's a really kind of almost the bulk of the job was just doing these roughs over and over again, doing ones that ones get cut, kind of change the idea, but essentially you're making a book in black and white in a kind of sketchy layout. and then printing it out and then reading it and seeing if it works and sending it off to the publishers, and then kind of that's where all the feedback is, because doing the color stuff, that's, you know, quite locked in once you've done that color work. So this is the point at which you change stuff. So yeah, some more roughs. And then rough to color. So finished roughs, everybody kind of signed them off, and then the next job is just me making the kind of final finished illustrations. So here's a rough, and then that's the color version. So I kind of use the rough as a pretty close guide. I mostly kind of put it on a low opacity and trace over it, and then I add my colors and go from there basically. But it's it's a almost true reflection of the sketch. Sometimes things change in color. So with this one, this was the sketch that was approved, but we kind of felt like you could see, we wanted to see more of the trench. So here was the finished artwork, and there you see it's quite different to the rough sketch in terms of layout, but essentially the same thing going on. Here's another rough. This one I did with a bit of colour because I just wanted to show the publishers what I intended, and it's quite hard with something like fire to get that across, but I feel like it wasn't adding too much time for me to add a little bit of colour into that rough, and it really helped sell it in. And then there was the final artwork. So it's kind of back and forth. So I do this quite rarely, adding colour to a rough, but sometimes it feels necessary. And then here's some of the finished spreads without the text on. So them as they get submitted. So I submit them like that, and then they'll drop the text in on their end. Yeah, and then it's one of the last ones there. And then the cover. It's a big job doing the cover. It's quite a lot of responsibility. You want to get it right, and it needs to look appealing and powerful, and needs to be able to be seen small and big and kind of read really well. So I did a lot of different cover ideas, and a few in colour there, as you can see. And just kind of sending them all over to the publishers and seeing what they thought. We ended up going for one that was one of these, but we kind of changed the angle a little bit. This down on the bottom row towards the middle on the right. You'll see there was the finished cover, and we wanted to keep it really simple. Just have Joey and Albert on the cover with the text, and kind of not much complicating it. And then it was a wraparound cover, so there's the front, and then the illustration continues onto the back and the side panel and the far right panel. And again, kind of things like book covers, you want to see them small on things like Amazon and still be able to know what the book is and what the title is and stuff. And if there's too much going on, it's quite confusing to read. So that was definitely playing on my mind as I made this cover. So from start to finish, Warhorse took me 1.5 years. The hardest parts, capturing the emotion, definitely. That was a real challenge, especially within the people. It really kind of put me through my paces a lot of the time. I'd never had to do something quite as powerful and emotive as this story. So it was a real challenge, but it was definitely something that I enjoyed taking on, and I hope has come through in the illustrations. And then illustrating the realities of war, whilst also this is a children's book, and is for kind of children from around 6 to 13 or so. So you can't be too graphic with what's going on in the illustrations, but also don't want to shy away from what was happening and telling the story and being true to that. So it's a very delicate balance about what you can and can't show. I kind of struggled a bit with that, but I think essentially, you know, being quite clear and adding it in when it's necessary is quite important. Especially for younger viewers, you need to be quite careful. And then one of probably the hardest thing about this whole book was just drawing horses. I think they're probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to draw. There's so many different muscles and the way their legs work, and they just look wrong straight away if you get them wrong. So a lot of practice and a lot of time went into that, and a lot of references and going to look at horses in real life and doing the course. So that definitely presented probably the main challenge. And then, you know, there's different things that the horses were wearing, so that it's quite tricky to get that right. The saddle and the bridle and the stirrups and all of that is very different when Joey's a farm horse to when he's a war horse. So I got some help from the British Horse Society, who sent me lots of references of exactly what the horse would be kind of wearing. And then getting the uniforms correct was also quite tricky. You know, this book had quite a lot of soldiers in, and different ranking soldiers, so just making sure that all of that was kind of spot on was definitely another challenge. But we were kind of picking through it quite a lot as we went, and making sure everything lined up. And then even the surroundings, kind of how trenches were built and stuff, I definitely had to go back and look through the book, and we did a kind of another pass and try to get all of that as close as possible. But yeah, it was a challenge, this book, but it was a really fun thing to do, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's how the book was made. I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for watching.